Welcome to the Handstandcast. You're here with Emmet Lewis, and I have my handstanding buddy in power,
Mikael Christiansen.
and I'd like to welcome you back to our next episode. We have a special episode today titled The Press. First off, we've got to say, we do courses on the press, so if you're looking for the practical details and all this, check it out. But we're going to try, talk about the press and ramble around the press in ways that sort of give you some ideas and some more deeper insights to how we actually go about teaching someone from no press to get them to press.
And why you should press.
Exactly. So, where do we start? It's one of those
I guess it's good to start just with the definition of the press.
Yeah.
So you could define a press to handstand as being able to get into a handstand without using any momentum from your legs, meaning that your hands would be placed on the floor or canes or bars or whatever, and from there you'd be using only power essentially to get yourself into a handstand. And there are several ways of doing this. Our approach to this will largely cover one of the ways. We'll be discussing all of them kind of a little bit here, but there's primarily one method of this that is the goal, and that is doing kind of the stacked press, where you try to get yourself as high on top of the shoulders as early as possible, and that you will be folding a lot of the hips and either using a straddling motion where you move the legs apart to create a large circle, and then basically making it so that your shoulder needs to lean the minimal amount forwards to bring your center of mass over your base of support so you can reach a handstand position. Alternatively, you can also pike it by keeping your legs together, but this is essentially the type of press that we're talking about here.
Yeah. It's also, we will be covering like the difference between, we divide the press up into two segments of high pressing and low pressing.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of an interesting topic because people kind of don't realize that they're actually two separate motions.
Yeah, completely separate.
So that's going to be good. I suppose we're going to have to talk a bit about flexibility and
flexibility. I think like the like I said, just like the bent arm press and the kind of planche pressing. Those aren't really discussed that much in the program because we're not trying to achieve them in those programs or in that program. But it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to understand the difference between planching and pressing, the way we describe it. And we'll start there and just get through kind of.
Yeah,
that idea.
Yeah, it's maybe actually good.
So with the press we do, or the style of press we're looking at, we are essentially trying to do the press through elevation, mild protraction, and compression. So what this means is we are trying to get the shoulders as close to their final position as early as possible in the press. So it's this shoulder flexion motion. And that then, if we think about the starting position of the press, it has two kind of bits. First is getting the feet off the ground.
This is then the standing press, the high press.
Yeah, getting the feet off the ground, getting into a controlled position, and then letting the hips come into their final position and the legs rise to follow. I think you've got a good way of explaining the compression aspect in the press.
Yeah, so like I think compression is one of the terms that I kind of despise the most when it comes to hand balancing in general, because it's kind of it's explained as being so when people imagine the compression aspect, they imagine a similar thing to when you're doing a sit-up, or if you're sitting on the floor and you in a straddled position, in kind of a pancake position, you lift the feet off of the floor, and that is a very midsection, like abdominal heavy exercise. And this is true to a degree only, and that's where it kind of annoys me, because when you compress, like compression, if you just think about it as a kind of physics phenomenon, if something should be compressed, there needs to be two opposing forces, right? So to be able to generate this compression, like you can't, if you now just put your hands on the floor, you lean towards your you lean your shoulders over your hands, and you just infinitely pull your legs towards your chest. Unless your shoulders do something, you'll just fall on your face. Like, it doesn't matter how much you compress unless your shoulders will be contributing kind of the opposing force there. And as Emmet just said, that in a press to handstand, as we're looking at it, that is literally elevation and kind of flexion of the shoulders that will act as that secondary force. And an interesting way of comparing this is if you want, is by doing the entirely the opposite motion, and that is doing a hanging leg lift. And you can very easily, reverse this motion here and kind of get an idea of how it works by, if you hang from a bar and you lift your feet as high as you can with straight legs, you will only be able to reach a certain degree before you have to kind of engage your lats and pull your shoulders down. Only then can you actually get the feet up to the bar. Like there is a certain level where basically your hips have come to rise as high as your feet have come to rise as high as your hips can allow you to.
Yeah, it's about belly button height.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can get like a little bit above. Some that are super flexible can get into kind of a high pike there, but unless there's some type of activation from the lats, nothing will happen. And that kind of pull down of the shoulders, and in that case, since it's the opposite, it's not flexion of the shoulders, it'll be extension of the shoulders, which means when you're hanging from the bar, you'll be pushing slightly against the bar. That will be what will be able to bring your feet to the bar. So I like this explanation because it's kind of fiddly in handstand to understand how the shoulders help compression when you feel that you're kind of leaning on them and want to stand on your hands and all these things. But it's exactly the same type of action, just completely reversed.
You can see this. A good place to actually spot this as well is if you look at someone doing a press walk. Now, a press walk is a beginning exercise where you put the hands on the floor and you push forward, you push high on the toes, and you try to compress. And what happens is when your compression and your mass going forward exceeds your ability to flex the shoulders, a little hop occurs and the head goes down and forwards in a diagonal line. So you'll see at that point, it's like the shoulder line breaks. I suppose that gets us back to the shoulder position and planche.
Yeah.
The planching type press.
Yeah,
what uses less compression.
Yeah. So like the interesting thing there is that like a press is an extremely body specific type of movement. And it's also very specific to like what kind of physical practice you have done, because as with everything in hand balancing, and this is something like we've talked about in the previous episodes and likely will mention again, like doing all these kind of things is essentially trying to solve a puzzle for your body, and your body will have to solve it with the tools it has at hand.
Yeah.
So what we are kind of advocating is basically working on those tools at the same time as you're learning the motion, so that you make sure that you have the optimal kind of structure for who you are and so on to learn it. But essentially, if the planching motion of a press happens when you lean forwards and the shoulders start going excessively over your hands, so they pass kind of where the fingers are, and you will see a distinct kind of break in the line from the hand upwards to the hip. So,
yeah, it's interesting because when I look at it in students, you'll see a planche, when they begin to planche, the shape becomes angular. Whereas when you're doing a normal standing press, there's kind of a gentle kind of curve.
Yeah, it's more rounded
in the shape. So you can always you can see it before they lose strength, or if they're strong enough to actually planche the press and then press out of that. Mikael's just kicking my mic stands.
Always kick this damn table. It's in the way.
It's like an awesome
Buy
table.
a new table, Emmet. God damn it.
It's like we're going to run a new Kickstarter later this year called Buy Emmet a Table.
Yeah, exactly.
I got a nice table, it's not good enough.
But first we need like the buy Emmet a house kind of thing, so that he'll have somewhere to put like.
I'm not sure you can do that on Kickstarter. I think that might have to be a GoFundMe.
Go to gofundme.com/Emmet Lewis.
Buy Emmet a house.
Yeah, where were
That's actually running, by the way. I'll have it up and running by the time this episode's out.
Excellent.
So
planching and roundness.
Planching. Yeah, so it's one of these things that I always think of a press as, it's one of the ways I used to coach it. I don't do it so much anymore. Is I'd coach the press from the idea, particularly with people who tumbled, from the idea of tumbling, and that you'd make a shape that you'd roll up on top of. So you need to make a curve in the body somehow. Whereas when you're just doing a brute strength, you need kind of angles and leverage. Is what I was thinking. I was like,
yeah,
that's the idea
of looking at it. Like it's also interesting because there's a very the most common it's both a conception and a misconception at the same time. It's kind of fascinating. Like the press is a very complicated movement, and it's not complicated because of how the movement is, but it's complicated because of all the various ways that different bodies want to express this damn movement. So the general assumption is this, that like a good stacked, neat, nice press, where for a very flexible person, is by definition easier to do than a kind of planched press, which is true. I mean, if you are extremely flexible and have excellent technique and kind of are able to do this very stacked press nicely, you will on average be using less energy than a planched press. But at the same time, what is interesting, if you look at these different bodies, if I do a Stalder press, since I'm not particularly strong at planching and I'm really strong at pressing, so for me when I do Stalder press, it's like, of course, the in relation to my flexibility, it'll roll up and it'll be kind of, that'll be the immediate thing to do. While I have a friend of mine in Oslo, he can probably do maybe as many kind of presses as I do, but he's a planche monster. So he's incredible. Yeah. He's just like absolutely batshit planches, and it's so cool to see him press, because for him and for his current ability, like he's more flexible than me, but for his body structure, he has so much force in the planche. So when the body tries to solve this equation and get up as easy as possible, he just leans a lot more than I do. I would die just doing like a 2 or 3 of the presses he does, while he's just so comfortable in that frontal position because he has so much to work with there. And that is just essentially not up to his proportions or his flexibility, because those are like very similar to mine. It's just that he has an enormous working capacity in this frontal position because of the kind of practice that he does.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'd kind of be interested to like make that guy suffer through, like, you know, regress back to the kind of press version you do and see what would happen.
The interesting thing is, like
would he be able to catch up?
I was messing around with like doing a Stalder press with my hands crossed in kind of cross-arm handstand. He just did it on the first try, no problem. Like no questions asked. So like this, and like for me that's really hard. There's a certain point where like my shoulders just scream. I
suppose because you can't depress hard enough because your pecs are in the way.
Yeah, it's a very weird thing. It hurts in my shoulders and it's janky, but like for him it was just apparently no big deal at all. I guess he can lean a lot more forwards. He's more comfortable there. So for him it didn't take him out of a place where he, like for me, it takes me out of the place I have power. He obviously had power there. Yeah. So it's cool with this, but like so the planching thing is something that we're in general trying to avoid with this one. Yes, because on average for most people it will require more power, and what it also does when you lean the shoulders excessively forwards is that it stops resembling a handstand at the point where kind of you when you start approaching the handstand, you will kind of make a large curve backwards with the feet, and it'll often end up kind of arched in the end. So you need to kind of correct it.
I always find that like when people want to do it on this one, what happens is what we're trying to do is go in sequence and order of the press, where it's like shoulders, spine, hips, legs come up in that order. Whereas what I see with this one is people will planche it.
Shoulders,
then
legs.
Shoulders kind of stay closed. They get the legs up, and then they kind of almost finish with a bit of a planche press as well towards the end. It's the generalization because it's like it is how people solve the problem, but it's still, you do see this. But it's it's always interesting. This idea, just to me, you touched on it, like body proportions in the press. It's like it just makes the changes so interesting. I remember who was it? A coach who will remain nameless on the internet, and he's always made this idea that like in a press the arms should be perfectly vertical, 90 degrees to the ground is the goal. And for a lot of people, like even if they have god tier flexibility, it's just not going to happen.
I mean, you need to move your weight over your hand, and if the arms are literally 180 degrees like vertical, then what's going to happen? Your weight is in your feet.
Yeah, and they just has this like, I just seen it recently, that's why it popped into my head. It was just like someone's Instagram video, and they've done really like, they put, tag them in the post and they're saying, oh, check out my press, I can now do 2 reps. For someone who's just like now doing 2 reps, like not just I can do 5 and this is 2. They were really good. It was really, really good. Like very good technique, very clean, very like, very good. There's nothing to fault with it. Then the coach is in, it's just like, no. Next level is to start reducing that lean. I'm just looking like, this person has very long arms. It's not going to happen.
Also, the person likely has an ass.
Yeah,
and
it was a girl as well.
And a couple of legs. And if there's weight in that ass and in those legs, you somehow need to get that weight over your fucking hands. And this pisses me off when people go like this with presses. It doesn't happen. Like, everyone will need to put their weight over their hands. The only way to do so is leaning that weight over the hands. Now, there's also where the kind of misunderstanding from the planching and kind of the rolling up motion comes. And I think the best distinction that can be made there is that the planched version, it will feel more like a delt heavy kind of thing. You can almost kind of imitate the muscular pressure by just grabbing two heavy dumbbells, and then you do like a straight arm lift up in front of you. It kind of feels like that. It's not as bicep heavy as a planche press, but it's similar kind of in that lift. If you kind of have the hands so that the thumbs face up and you just lift those weights, it's rather similar. While
Mikael's just lifting my table here, but continue.
Yes. The one that I kicked, by the way. While if you do a stacked press, it's much more kind of a trapezius heavy movement, where like you will feel, of course, you'll feel some delts. Like for most people, at least learning it, they'll feel some delts. Sure, they're working, so why not? While ideally, like kind of that stack, that ability to roll up comes from being able to stay in elevation and then to be using the shoulder flexion from a minimal lean, and then bring the kind of, you lean over your hands, the feet hover off the floor as you straddle or as you pike and you go up, the shoulders go from that minimal lean and they move back over your hand.
Yeah.
And that happens from shoulder flexion.
That's really interesting. I remember, I think at the retreats you were doing a demonstration showing the shoulder flexion to stacked or shoulder extension to flexion action in the press. It was kind of funny because it's the first zone of the press, of the high press, where you compress, push the shoulders from an extended position into flex position, and then your feet were just going, you're doing reps of it, showing off. It's kind of like, and look, I just do nothing with my hips, and the hip angle stays completely the same. And all what was happening was you were flexing the shoulders into the position, and your feet were coming up to about elbow height. Yeah. And then after that to come up, it would have just been like, okay, fully extend just the lumbar spine, and the legs come up. And
I also did that with the legs bent. So all of you people who say, oh no, I can't press because my hamstrings are too stiff. Well, but if it is the hamstrings, then just bend your legs and press then. Like, it is possible. It isn't even a problem if you can press. But if you can't, well, it might be something else than that hamstring flexibility of yours, because it's certainly heavier to do a bent leg kind of janky, strange pike press than a very nice wide straddle press. But the point is that like the midsection, the hamstrings, the compression, like the ability to bring your legs close to your body will reduce the amount of power that your motor needs to exert to get up, but the motor is the shoulders. Like,
I remember regardless on this one, when I learned to pike press in circus school, I figured out that I could pull myself into my pike as hard as possible, really tense, like over tense, put my hands down, lean forward, and then just release the legs. I'd planche forward. I had a good planche strength back then. I'd just planche forward and then just release the compression. My legs would fire up like a rubber band and that would just get me in. So I was like, okay, let's use this stiffness together. So.
Yeah, it's really, I find it also fascinating because I can consistently pull off 10 shoulder presses without being at the level of I'm without a warmed up pancake essentially, so being where I can barely get my forehead to the ground and I can still smash out 10
after we taught the 2 retreats, and then towards the end of the second one I seen that you're just feeling a bit from the training, possibly the stretching. I got you in the morning just to go like, Mikael, how far is your pancake? And it was going,
not great.
No, it was like you could barely get, you couldn't lean forward. You were 20, 30 degrees forward. It was really stiff for him. We've been training quite a long time. It was early. You'd only had 2 liters of coffee at this stage.
Yeah.
But I was just like, Miguel, how flexible you are, just to show the group. You couldn't do anything. I was like, can you press from there? And you just stalled it straight away.
Yeah.
So like, it's kind of like what we think when getting to the flexibility idea for the stolder is like, or even just the normal press, we think we need a lot of flexibility, but there's kind of the more shoulder flexion strength you have, and articulation strength, and depression strength for low pressing, the less flexibility you need to do it.
And this is of course not a, like, we are of course a very interested in like teaching so that you actually build up the flexibility to do it, because again, like, you can use less strength, it'll become an easier motion, and when you're learning this, of course you want it to be as easy as possible to actually be able to access it. Of course you're going to stretch for it, of course you're going to develop that part too. It's just that it isn't like what I like refer to as belly button magic that lift you up. Like, I've had this discussion a billion times with people literally trying to convince me that there's some kind of magical inward suction behind the belly button.
The mula bandha. You got to like turn your mula bandha on correctly.
Yeah, and that's how you press. And I'm just like, but how the hell can I be really damn good at pressing? I've never heard of this. Like, I just lean forward and imagine I take a shit and then I fly up. But it's essentially that, like, you just need to, and I think like the kind of the hidden factor in this as well, which is rarely mentioned, is that like the level of passive shoulder flexion that people have. Like, if you have stiff shoulders that can't reach 180 degree or 180 degrees on a like kind of 180 degree type of handstand flexion, it's hard to make an exact measurement there because of a lot of
179.5 degrees exactly. If it is not that, you are a bad human.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to be brought back to the shop and fixed.
Yeah, then like just stop handstands. Just stop shaming yourself. That's at least what the internet will tell you. But the point here is that if your flexion of the shoulders is not particularly great, it is going to be hard to do straight handstand. That is kind of common knowledge at this point. Now, the big kicker there is that if you can't do this straight handstand, that is kind of challenging for you. When you bring the legs down in front of the body into a press, your body has to deal with this amount of weight being outside of your body line. And if that flexion is not great already from the start when you're in the handstand, it'll continue to move forwards, but it'll start in a less flexed place, and it'll move a lot more forwards, and it'll be extremely heavy. You're essentially working both against gravity and your own structure. So the funny part, like the press that Emmet just described with bent legs, that I very often use when I teach and demonstrate. Like,
have you got that on your Instagram? Have you got that into your Instagram?
I think I did it sometime, but maybe I should do that again.
Yeah, maybe
like
repost it or tag it.
Make a clear thing on that. But anyway, like the idea of like the fact that like the reason I can do that is just my shoulders are very cooperative with this kind of press. And
says the man who is Mikael's warm-up set when he comes into the gym. It's one of the things when I've been around a lot of hand balancers, but I knew Mikael online a bit as well. But the first time I seen him like training, I knew he was dealing with something a bit different when he warmed up his plates, just doing kind of chatty warm-up, kicks up to a one arm, straight into one arm, does straddle 15 seconds, straddle 10, 15 seconds, straight, figa, flag. In the same set, came down and just shook his wrist and said, garbage, in the garbage. I was just like, okay, he's on his hands for about 2 minutes just doing one arms as his warm-up set. I was like, okay.
Yeah, but you can feel it immediately if it works or not.
It's like better than most people will ever get in their life. It's like, yeah, in the garbage. It's like, okay, I'm dealing with a special character for more than one reason.
Yeah, that is one of my taglines. That has to be said. But to just like wrap up that thing about the kind of the press thing there, that like if you fight both gravity and your own structure, it is going to be heavy. So that is the thing that like, and I've seen this very many times. Like one of my colleagues, her name is Mari, and I work with her in a show called Fritt Fram, a super cute kids performance, ridiculously cute actually. But she has one of the most like perfectly flexible hips I've ever seen. Like she will kasplat into like an ultra perfect middle split at any time. Her pancake is perfect, her pike is perfect. Everything of forward folding is ridiculously, absolutely ultra mutant perfect. And I remember when I started, like, because we started training together like over 10 years ago, and I always wondered, like, but she had such a hard time with handstands, and it just seemed as if, like, but it should be so easy for her to press. It should be so easy for her to press, everyone said. And like, whenever she tried, like, she couldn't tuck jump, she couldn't straddle jump, and just like, she felt like it was so difficult for her to do just even a normal handstand. And kind of the people we were around at the time were like, yeah, but it should be easy for her to do it. But like, no, it wasn't at all, because her shoulders like are not moving into that range at all. So for her, even with those hips, it doesn't matter. She has to lean an enormous amount, because her shoulders just can't even get into that range while lifting the hands overhead. Even harder to do it when it's in shins and handstand. So of course it's going to be very difficult to press. So these things are just kind of
Don't worry. It's my turn.
It's kind of a hidden factor that I think is just seldom spoken about, because of course, like, people get that, yes, strength, compression strength, mystical, magical belly button things.
Mula Bandha. We've got to like sell the Mula Bandha course soon.
Yeah. If anyone tells you that you have to do magic belly button things, they are wrong. Yeah. Demonstrably so. I had to mention.
Probably shouldn't get into that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, some of the discussions I've had on that have been borderline toxic. So
we'll leave the Mula Bandha alone. Yeah. But to kind of touch on something I'd like to get on, just out of interest than anything else, is there is a forgotten style of press that I've seen it. It's basically like, it's the classic one if you're a handstand coach and you're listening to this and you've taught some workshops, and you get a girl generally. Well, every time it's happened for me, it's been a girl. They've generally been a ballet dancer or some kind of contemporary dance, and they can't handstand,
and they just fly up for no reason.
Yeah, but I kind of like, I nailed it. You see this with kids gymnastics as well. When before girls get their secondary growth spurts and teenage thing, when they're stronger than the boys, they'll do this style of press where they go from a straddle L, and they kind of lean forward enough, but then their back arches beyond straight. And they kind of like, it's almost like they're twerking or something. They stick the butt out, and that lifts the sacrum up. And then they lift the legs, and they're so flexible, they come up and around, and they kind of cantilever the whole shape up. And generally their head is big enough to counterbalance.
Their head is so fucking big.
Yeah.
It's like, I remember I also saw like a little boy gymnast do, like, I think it was a tuck planche or something. Like, it wasn't like particularly complicated. But it was like, he had no shoulder lean almost whatsoever. Because the head was just enormous. It's like, of course, if you have like a big helmet on your head, you just need to lean a lot less. But it's kind of fascinating with that.
Yeah.
And like, I think also like that, of course, I mean, start people young, they also learn really quickly. But I've seen that quite often, this like Stalder pressing little girls, but that can't stand in the actual handstand. They kind of press up, and either they fall back down to the straddle L, and they can do this several times in a row, or they kind of like cartwheel out or go into bridge or so on. Yeah. But this one is kind of common. So I mean, you do see people like, there was the dancer girl I taught once. Like, I taught her a class, and she had absolutely super perfect lines. I mean, a brilliant dancer and very articulate, very high level of body understanding, so she could just kind of get all the cues immediately. She had, of course, no forearm strength, so she just couldn't stay up. Like, regardless of how hard she pushed her fingers into the ground, there wasn't enough to be able to counter lever her body, so she just fell over all the time. And then we were done with the class, and she says, "Oh wait, but I can do this thing. Let me show you." And she just puts her hands on the floor. She goes up on tippy toe, and then just does a perfect, like, 10 out of 10 perfect press, and falls straight over. And it's just like, where did that come from? And I have that on video, and it's interesting because she, like, her proportions and her level of hip flexibility is so great that, like, there's barely any lean forwards at all. Of course, there is, as with everyone, a slight bit, but as her feet come off the floor, their legs also straddle so wide, they kind of almost go in front of the.
Yes, that kind of, I've seen that as well. It's like it's almost like a range of motion press in the Stalder.
Yeah.
And they just kind of cross.
Higher up.
Yeah, exactly. And they just stay like, just counterbalance the hips just the right amount to get over.
Yeah.
It's kind of.
But like, this is like we talked about in the start, that like, you just have all these variations of how this movement can be executed. You have this dancer here who has kind of the perfect proportion. She has no like, it's kind of dumb to say she has no strength. Like, it's not really that, but like, it's just she has fortunate.
She has ability.
Yeah. And like, but there's a fortunate mechanics and angles at work, while you have others who just like need to use like crazy ass 1 RM power push to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And that also kind of leads us into like the third style of press, which is also very much of a power, more muscle based press, which is when you need to bend your arms.
Yeah.
And you usually would see that with I think it's a very fascinating kind of press, because old school, like the kind of the bent arm handstand gang that used, like how it used to be like back in the days, like like you'd see it in hand to hand and stuff, like when they do the two strong guys act, and then the guy would press up.
See it, some of them, they'd kind of like, they'll go into this bent arm. So bent arm press, for people that know, is you set up in as you would for a normal standing straddle press. You'll push forward as far as you can, and then when you feel you're about to planche, you bend the arms, and then that will lower the head a bit, and the hips go up a bit higher, and then you transition, and then you kind of straighten the arms out and press and finish the press.
It's kind of like almost a kind of half handstand push-up thing.
Yeah, I've revived all these bent arm pressings for one of my clients recently, because he just doesn't have great shoulders overhead. Hello, Mark. But he knows this, but it's just like, it's, as I said, it's like, it's going to take a year, and he's like, oh, that's fine, we'll sort the shoulders out. But he's ridiculously strong. He's so strong. And it's like,
hi, Mark.
I was just doing, basically, hi, Mark. So, we getting handstand push-ups, getting loads of reps on them, and like, it's like, okay, we've got to do something just to keep you interested in things. Let's learn all this bent arm pressing stuff.
Yeah.
So now he's doing like bent arm press. He's doing the standing to bent arm planche to 90-degree push-up. Like these kind of old school ones. I had to dig out some old school gymnastic manuals to go, what the hell were all these elements?
Yeah, but I think they're very interesting, and they still also, like in a lot of like parallel bars kind of stuff, when they do the swinging dips and they're going to use that kind of momentum based stuff, it's very important that gymnasts have that strength. Like you see it also on the rings, like unless they are like Olympic level dudes that only do the straight arm elements, like you'll often see kind of like a bent arm press to handstand in the rings and so on.
Bent arm press is still an element in gymnastics. Like as long as it's down, you don't lose points if you say I'm going to bend. Yeah. But then there's criteria. You have to go 90 degrees and straighten out.
But like what I find fascinating with the bent arm press is, like for some people it's so much easier, especially if you then have a body structure or like a shoulder structure or a lack of kind of flexibility or strength or whatever it is. It'll be a lot easier to bend the arms. For me, for example, to do a fully 90 degrees bent arms pike press is a lot heavier than doing a normal pike press, because that's just a position I never use. While it's also harder to do that than to do like a normal handstand push-up. It's just like, it kind of feels like it's just a weird kind of half-ass motion for me, is that I never do. But like the bending has a tendency to happen, or it always happens for the people that don't do it consciously and want to do it. It usually happens as like they lean forwards, they have a lot of strength to recruit from bent arms, and your body comes to a point where it goes, okay, holy shit, I cannot work any longer on these straight arms. I have the option of stopping, falling forwards, or bending the arms and continue the push. And if your intention is going up to the handstand, that is what your body will do to solve this puzzle. So it's something that can be done, but it is I would say that like kind of the little, like at least the acceptable level of a little bit of a planchy press usually carries over more into a stacked press than the bent arm does. It kind of changes the mechanics to a degree.
I think it's just one of those ones that's like, it's a dangerous game to play, because it basically, the other thing is drop the center mass. It basically gets your center mass lower. So then you learn to press with a hip that you're not actually training the compression ideal as well.
Yeah, for sure. You don't compress as much as her.
So then you just basically lose that. So then you're kind of losing at two fronts. But it's kind of like, I think it's a rare person whose first press will be without bent elbows.
Yeah, like I see that often people that just try to brute force a press by starting it down without having done like preparations through negatives or range of motion pressing and so on, they'll usually bend. And they'll usually bend by like kind of internally rotating the arms a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of...
So the elbows flare out. Because like actually doing a bent arm press with kind of externally rotated arms, that becomes that kind of like actual...
Loads it into the triceps. And
yeah, and that's very heavy, I feel, to do that version. While when you kind of flare them a bit, you can kind of pass by a little bit of that kind of straight arm, like heavy traps dominant kind of push. But
maybe we should invent that press, call it the egg press, where you make an egg shape, because that's what kind of happens with the arms. Just keep them like that.
Egg press to handstand, starring Emmet Lewis, coming now.
New course coming soon. We're going to kickstart that one as well.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, GoFundMe. You can just like throw that onto like your house.
Yeah.
So
my egg press filming room.
Yeah. But like when you like, what was I going to say about the bent arm press? Yeah. The thing with bending, I think, which is, I think the main reason it happens for a lot of people is that like doing press to handstand is kind of dumb in terms of like the general biomechanics of your body. Like whenever in your life do you use a similar kind of muscular activation chain in your normal daily life?
Walk up the stairs without bending your knees.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Like if let's say you're going and you pick up a large heavy box with books in it and you're going to put that on the top shelf. Are you going to do that with straight arms and shrug trapezius? No. You're going to bend your arms. You're going to maybe stick your chest out a bit to get access to your big muscles and use them, because that is the sensible thing to do, which means that you'll have more access to power that you've built up through your life in those types of positions. And also, if you've gone to the gym, you've likely done bench press, you've likely done military press, like if you were into training and been involved with such things, then you have likely more access to kind of bent arm strength in those types of positions than you are to that kind of just weird upper back straight arm handstand strength. So it needs to be built specifically and separately.
Stupid when you think about it. It's like, we're going to press and we're going to use all these crappy little muscles on our back.
Yeah.
When we could just use our chest.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
maybe you'll get jacked as well, and you won't end up like one of these acrobats has like no pecs.
No, you'll end up like a street workout dude, bro.
Yeah.
Like, look at them. They're jacked as hell. And they're really good at these things. So...
it's a lesson to be learned there, guys. Yeah. Lesson to be learned.
And it's like in like the old school guys too. Like that's what they used to do, because it fits better the style of handstand that they did, which had much more closed shoulder angles. So it's much less efficient to press with straight arms and like the wide straddle and so on. So bending arms is the go for that. But it actually leads us to an interesting thing. Why the hell do we do this straight arm strength or the straight arm press? Like you might say, oh, which it looks pretty. Yeah, it does too. But what really matters is that like this press is the one that resembles the straight handstand that we're trying to teach the most. And like you can demonstrate this by like, let's say you are in a straight handstand and then you start a negative. Let's say we do that negative now in a straddle position. So the legs open. And as your legs reach kind of 90 degree and start moving downwards, you start bending your arms and you move into a bent arm press. Like obviously you have changed the shoulder mechanics so much that as the legs come down to 90 degrees and your arms start to bend, it's no longer in that same kind of placement as a straight handstand. And then we do the same thing. Handstand, you straddle the legs, you start bringing them down, and you lean your shoulders a lot forwards into a planche. Again, you've changed the positioning significantly. Now, if you do the stacked press, you pull the legs downwards and you keep the upwards pressure. Yeah. You keep pulling the legs down and you roll from first, it's just the legs articulating, then the hip flexors start articulating, pulling the legs down. When they reach their limit, the sacrum starts articulating, and then the spine and so on. But the upwards pressure from your trapezius will still be the same, even in the bottom of the press. Like, it'll be heavier, it'll be slightly different, of course, but it'll resemble the actual handstand position a lot more than the planche and the bent arm one will. And this is kind of a thing I feel is a little bit overlooked with the press, because to me, that's why you do it. It gives you the ability to kind of, you're still in a handstand when the legs are down there. And because you're still in a handstand and the legs are down there, you have a very short way to go back up, and it kind of has also the big plus, which is our main reason for hammering a lot with the press, is that this type of control of underbalance is something that will be very beneficial when you're learning the one-arm handstand.
Yeah, underbalance, just for those who didn't tune in last week or the week before, whatever we talked, is when you're losing balance, or your balance is on the more mass is on the side of your hands coming back to standing.
Yeah, on the heel of the palm, essentially, when you move towards there and you want to fall back to your feet, catching that is dealing with underbalance.
It's kind of like we're talking about this the other day, it's like overbalance is when you begin handstands, your main battle is with overbalance. You kick over the top, you lose at that way you go to an arch, this kind of thing. But once you learn to do heel pulls and strengthen the fingers, where you put pressure into the fingertips, then your main battle becomes with underbalance. That's where all the cool tricks are. Like basically every trick or position in a handstand means moving your legs some way into underbalance.
Yeah, kind of.
Tuck handstand, pike, straddle. So it's this idea that, like, one of the things I'm always looking for with people.
Hell, even Mexican, you kind of do that. I mean, no one wants to be finger heavy in a Mexican.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just kill yourself.
It's the art of the Mexican. And same with the Mexican, actually. This idea, what I'm looking at is the top 3 to 4 ribs and the scapula and the push kind of work as a unit, always in the handstand. So when we're coming down, if we're keeping our stack, I've got my arm up overhead and kind of demoing it, you can feel it out, that even when I'm moving, I'm not flexing the upper part of the body more than the handstand line, but that's what's causing the forward lean, and the rest of the contortion of the spine is coming higher than that. So I have this block, so that's kind of, there's a lot of mass on that connected zone, and that keeps everything in place. And it's the same, actually, just to segue into Mexican slightly, is the way I coach Mexican, and you can see my students, they get pretty good at it, I don't let them flex the shoulders further. If you look at their shoulders, the shoulders aren't actually more open than they're doing in a handstand. I'm keeping that, if you look at the top 3 ribs, it's all coming from like below T4. That's where I'm looking at and getting the spine out. This means you're just not getting a lot of pressure on this too open position.
Yeah, it can kind of kill the shoulders
a lot. It's too risky. You'll see people doing it, but...
Yeah, I mean, if you're strong enough, you can do it, but I mean, it's...
I always think it's one of those ones, because you're taking the balance off of the musculature and putting it onto the passive structures like shoulder labrum and stuff like this. And I'm just not, insurance reasons. I coach people to do it because it'd be terrible to fuck yourself doing a Mexican.
Yeah, but maybe enough about Mexican. That's probably for another episode. A little bit of a tangent there.
Coming next week, the Mexican. No, I do Mexican.
But I think that since to bring it back to the press to handstand and its similarity to the actual handstand, it does of course it gives you a option of getting up into handstand that is cool looking, that'll give you the ability to come up with absolute control, which is another very interesting opportunity and an interesting thing, especially for actually performance purposes, I would say. Being able to press means that as soon as your hands are on the floor and you do that push from the shoulders, the little lean forwards to get the weight into your hand, and you start moving upwards, you are already, in principle, in handstand as the feet come off the floor, and you can control each and every little detail as you move upwards, because there's no momentum going. And speaking from the position of a performer, I never mess up when I jump up on canes. Actually, the first time I jumped up on canes ever on stage, I just felt straight over, and my heart rate went from 120 to 2,000. It was dreadful. Jump up and just slam straight over. It's ridiculous. But essentially, what I do now, whenever I'm going to jump up on canes, of course, I know I'm going to jump to a position I'm really strong in, but I'll jump maybe 80 or 90%, and the last percent I press. Which means that I'll jump to a position where I'm still kind of in that underbalance zone, and I'll use just power to finish it. But because I have that jumping power and that absolute control of the press, it ends up being kind of a net sum of almost no energy used. But the fact that I have control in all of this kind of underbalanced zone means that it costs me very little if I don't jump far enough, for example. And I don't need to jump to exactly 100. I can jump to 80 or 85 or 90 or 97 or whatever. I will have control getting there. So it's a very useful tool for all of that. And that's also the thing, like when you get into one arm handstands and like in push harder, of course we teach this in straddle as kind of the beginning point, because that is where it is the most accessible. And the thing, if you would take the comparison of these three pressing styles that we've essentially discussed here, the planched, the bent arm, and the stacked press, the stacked press is the one that you can use as or it will develop a capacity to be able to keep the same shoulder position as we talked about. You'll keep the same shoulder position in your handstand as when your legs come rather low. Of course, past a certain point, they'll start rounding more, but you'll be able to keep the same shoulder position for longer, which means that when you're moving into those kind of straddle fingertip holds for the first couple of 100 times, and they're rather heavy to do and so on, and your hips want to move all over the place and your legs want to drop, if your press is really damn strong at that point, you will likely not drop as far and as quickly. Because you can stay on top. While if bent arm pressing is what you have, you want to move into kind of a lot of elbow bending there. You're into b-boy territory, and balancing like that is really hard. And if you want to planche, like planching on one arm doesn't even work like it works on two arms, but like moving the shoulders forwards and front over the wrist is just like sayonara for your entire wrist. So it's just basically not an option. So that is kind of
the one arm planche where you actually go straight forward.
Yeah, and crush your wrist forever.
So let's sort of move on to, I don't know,
low press.
Low press. I suppose we also got to cover like how do you raise everything at the same time? I think it's one of those things we came up sort of together that was like, you start off as a base person, you're like, okay, I'm not flexible and I can't press. It's like, well, are we able to train both this shoulder flexion strength we want for the press, either high or low pressing? Low press we'll get to in a second. At the same time, can we develop the flexibility at the same time? Can we raise both attributes or use one of them to offset the other? It's always this like interesting thing for me. It's like I'm always interested, like, can I raise all qualities at the same time at the same rate, or do we need to put more stats into one or more stats in the other, or does the person naturally come with them? So it's this idea, like, if you get the ideal person who can't touch their toes and can't handstand, by the time their handstand has gotten quite nice, they'll probably be quite flexible if they kept like the work in some time. So give them a year and a half, that kind of thing. So it's like, oh, well, then the press, everything gets, you have this more options to get the more fluid, perfect technique. Whereas if you're kind of behind on one, then it gets into this idea like, well, which side, say flexibility, which part of the flexibility do we need to look at more? It's like, well, is it, say, total range of motion, or is their total range of motion really good, but then their active use of that range of motion is really bad? And it's an interesting thing, because like going back to sort of the Mikael thing earlier, when he was really stiff at the retreat and could still press, it's like, well, he's got very good active flexibility is one thing I'll note about Mikael. He's got his active flexibility very closely matches his passive flexibility. Whereas what you'll find a lot is you'll find people will push the passive flexibility side of things that have like completely, over pancake, face flat to the floor, cold, chest to the floor, but they can't generate enough compression at the hips. They can't lift the legs high enough or hard enough to resist the shoulder power almost. That then it's like, well, people, the classic one, like, even if you're one yoga block away from the floor with your face, but you can't lift your legs up to about elbow height with the knees in a seated compression, then you're getting to a point where, like, well, you don't need more flexibility. You just need to be able to actually use your flexibility more and lift higher and lift deeper into it. So it's one of these things that's like, the nice thing is the active flexibility improves quite quickly. And certain people like passive flexibility, it doesn't come easy for some people. That's fine if they start a bit later in life and haven't got put as much time into it. Whereas if they work their active flexibility basically one-to-one with their passive, that it all raises at the same time, and before they have an excess of passive flexibility, they're actually able to get these presses and more compressed style of pressing quite quickly. So it's this interesting thing. It's like, yes, we work, tapping my mic thing. So we're working against gravity always, and not expressing our flexibility with the help of gravity. It's also like what we're looking for is it's one of those things. I always like looking at movements flipped like 90 degrees or 180 degrees. So like, what does this movement look like upside down? What does it look like? So just going back to what Mikael was saying with the hanging leg raise. Same with, if we look at, say, our pancake, what does our pancake look like if we were to flatten the back out and straighten my arms into a handstand shape and have my back kind of flat? Well, if you look at it, say you're leaning about 45 degrees forward, well, you can get an actual idea of where the feet will be and other stuff. Like, you might be looking going like, well, actually my feet are in line with my elbows. Well, that means you've got an excess of flexibility for the actual standing press. But if you can't access it with the resistance of the shoulders, or just the ability to compress yourself, this is the other thing, is like you're working your compression kind of without gravity's assistance. Like, there's nothing pulling your torso down, and the legs are kind of like having to compress in free space towards the torso. So it's this idea, like, can you increase that as a variable? Can you increase your shoulder flexion strength and your just articulation? And can you increase your passive to the point where they all kind of just coincide, and then you press? And it can be like, a Venn diagram, but they kind of veered off to one side. It's like, I've got a bit more strength on my side, or I've got a bit more flexibility. So we're trying to find the perfect balance for you to press. And then it comes.
And it's I think it's of course, like, in terms of putting it into practice, it is a very individual thing, since people's bodies are in all shapes and levels of training and all of that crap. So it's not something, like, I think it's one of the least linear things to, or like, it's linear in terms of developing the strength and flexibility themselves, but it's like you can, it's hard to just see a person, and like a lot of people ask, like, I want to press in this and this much time. Like, it's just like, I can't know at this time how long it's going to take, because
I find it's the same. It's like very
it's there's like all these factors, because like suddenly someone's just like, hey, okay, that pancake became really, really good really, really fast, and then the alignment is pretty good, and then like they're pretty far ahead already, while someone else might just be like having pretty good hips, not great shoulders, the opposite, and so on. So it's like, it's a very it's a game with basically like there's a lot of stats that needs to, or skill points that need to be attributed at the right places here to kind of make sure that you have progress on it. But maybe we should talk a little bit about the low press, because that is kind of another beast altogether. Low press then meaning, like, if a high press is from a standing position, you put your hands on the floor, you push hard into the floor, and then you go into a handstand. Then the low press is essentially moving from either an L-sit position or a straddle L-sit position. You push hard into the ground and you lift your ass upwards until you arrive either then in that standing position where the standing press starts, or you continue all the way into handstand. And the interesting part there is that these two, like the low and the high press, are rather different in terms of like both the strength that they use. Flexibility is maybe more similar, but you will find you'll even find professional hand balancers that are pretty damn good at one arms, very good at standing presses, can't do a single Stalder press or can't do a single L-sit press, simply because like that pressure you're using is no longer you're no longer using shoulder elevation and flexion as kind of your driving force. It's scapular depression instead here, like your delts, your biceps, your lats, all of this is like in your serratus and stuff. These things are working really hard as you're starting to lift your hip upwards, and that just requires specific training.
This doesn't really, you don't really get a crossover. It's kind of one of those things, like there's a lot of people say on the high press section where like they've gotten a really good strong deep tuck, and I've gone, okay, just try press, and suddenly they're able to press from like 10 centimeters off the floor. Whereas you don't get that kind of crossover to the low press, there's just no, it's like a dead zone of pressing.
Yeah.
I think it's, what are they saying? It's kind of interesting that if you look at what's going on in it, once again, it's like the press is really like a stalder press all the way up to handstand is a 4-stage movement or a 5-stage movement. But on the low press section, it's got 2 zones and a transition zone, where the first zone you have to compress the legs harder and lean forward so the shoulders do planche a bit. Then you have to start compressing the hips. The legs, I tell people to bring the legs closer to the arms as when they're learning, but then you can throw that cue out once you get super strong. But then you have to protract harder, flex the spine more, and that's what kind of gets the hips start going up. And that means then the arms can go from this kind of pseudo tuck planche position closer to the takeoff zone, the initial forward lean of the actual press itself, the standing press. And then you have the transition from when the feet are going from, say, I don't know, just ahead of the fingertips to just behind it into the hover, starting the high press.
Yeah, that's a big sticking point for a lot of people. Like,
yeah, that transition.
Cracking that one.
It's kind of like, because it's that like that last change. I think I've almost cued in for most people. It happens about if the arms are straight in front of you, like a push-up position, because it's like that change from like, okay, I've gone depression, and then I have to like articulate the shoulders into elevation.
Yeah, I often talk about like try to get onto your traps as early as possible at that stage, because there's the kind of a takeover point there from like it feeling like more like kind of
you can really feel it as well. Like, I remember when I used to stalder, you'd get it from this you'd feel my serratus cramping, working, and then the upper back kicks in a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I would usually feel like if I would do one that goes extremely slowly, I'd feel kind of like a bicep and front delt and serratus kind of thing. And as that switch happens, it kind of goes from there and like kind of gets into the upper traps as you do that transition when the feet kind of pass the hands. But it's to be able to develop these kind of the low stages of the press. Like obviously, let us now just take the stalder as the example of the straddle L and press to handstand. You needed to develop a straddle L, and like in the bottom of the straddle L, as you kind of sit there, you are literally you're aiming for keeping the kind of inner thigh like slightly above your elbow, because you can sit in a straddle L that is lower, where kind of your legs rest on your forearms instead. But what you will see then is that the scapula will kind of stick out from the upper back, and they'll kind of wing away a bit because your shoulders are kind of
that wing. It's also like the people aren't as flexed forward. You see or they can be slightly like
they're kind of up towards the ears, and it's that kind of depression of the shoulders and that rounding of the upper back that you will see kind of coincide with the fact that the legs can move above the elbow joint. Often I cue people to just try to do this with bent legs first, just so they get an idea of like how it feels. Because like if with bent legs you can set up a straddle L reasonably easy and get the sensation of this rounded back and this downwards protracted and depressed shoulder position. And from there, like I find it very fascinating when I teach this movement, and it's like, because you do have some people. I remember like years ago I coached a dude from Germany, Nikolai. What's his name? What's his last name? Nikolai, that does a lot of things. Huh?
Paulus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nikolai Pavlas.
Paulus.
Yes. Hello, Nikolai.
Hey, Nikolai.
Yeah. So he.
He's a machine.
Yeah, but he struggled a lot with the standing press, and then like I just asked him about like trying from L sit and stuff, and he would just fly up to kind of the standing position as if it was no one's business on like first try. He would just like boom. He had loads of strength there.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if it was because he had trained like planching work or other relatable things before.
He definitely was going through. As a friend of ours, he's definitely had planche phases in his life.
Yeah. So like he just had tons of strength in there already, and so you can just be monstrously strong on this bottom part but not be able to standing press or high press. And you will I think it's very fascinating because you can just test whether or not someone will be able to lift particularly high from an L sit or a straddle L position by just have someone try to do a tuck planche. if a tuck plunge is not doable, like let's say
Yeah.
you set someone's hands up on the floor, you have them protract their shoulder blades, pull the knees in. If the feet can't all come off the floor comfortably and hover there for a while, and it just like kind of flops and goes down, no, the person isn't pressing anywhere, because you need to pass through this kind of tuck plunge position as your butt goes from kind of low, it goes into the kind of mid zone where it starts going behind you, but then it needs to pass up, and then in that point you are kind of in the maximal amount of forwards lean, and it shouldn't be a lot, but there is a little bit, and it's very, very it resembles the tuck planche position a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of, just to get a visual of this one, if you just imagine a tuck planche, then you can just imagine how the legs would project down and forwards. Drawing in the air.
You're terrible today.
I know, all over the place. Yeah, but the legs would project down and forwards towards the face, and that would give you the idea of how it relates to the straddle L position. But it's one of these points that this is a common sticking point for a lot of people. And there's a few interesting ways around it. One, it just gets fucking stronger. Two, what I like to do with people is momentum on the way up.
Yeah.
Use like an L sit with a bit of a swing.
Yeah.
Get the momentum, and then negatives down, but then also cue when you feel you get to that kind of straight alignment, or when the shoulders and hips on that line parallel to the ground, try to add a pause on the eccentric.
Yeah.
Just above that parallel line, slightly above, just so you get used to resisting at that point. So you can go, okay, I can go in, and then I have some force, I have something to press against.
Yeah, that's like that we decided also in kind of the press program, was just like, but like the thing is, funnily enough, like a Staller is easier to pull off than a very strict L sit press to handstand, but it is a lot harder to learn, because a straddle L position, you're locked. Where your legs are resting on your arms, which means that like you can't get any momentum, you can't get any kind of swinging force or any help from that position unless you have one of these freak straddle L's where your legs are pointing 45 degrees up. Yeah, then you can kind of get a bit of whip out of that. But like the strength for the L sit and the straddle L press is exactly the same. So if you work from an L sit, first of all, an L sit is easier to hold than a straddle L. If you have kind of general level of strength for these things, it's less technical. So, and you can use a little bit, like I'm not happy about seeing people swinging into it. I've like it should, like if you're able to use a little bit of a rocking motion to add more centimeters to that kind of lift, it should be a strength, a kind of power lifted motion,
it's kind of just pushing it over the edge, and not swinging
like,
through it.
Speaking of that, like a little short anecdote on that was like, I wasn't at calisthenics park in Oslo many years ago. Bunch of dude bros training there, and it was playing music and everything was fine. I stretch a bit. Like for me, it's like no big deal. I go to the parallel bars and I just do a bunch of L sit presses to handstand. And like, of course, like a lot of the guys there weren't used to seeing people doing like pretty solid damn presses for reps in the bars. So everyone kind of stops and looks at me, and I come down and it's like, okay. And one guy comes over and is like, yeah, that's really cool. Like I used to do gymnastics when I was a kid. Like, yeah, I wonder if I can still do it. He said, and he just grabs the bars. He kind of like swings his hips forwards, like not even L sit, kind of straight body swing. Just like he just throws his legs backwards as high as he can. Of course, he can't fucking press to handstand. And mind you, like these bars they were 1.5 meters tall, I think, or more. They were pretty like high parallel bars. So he just flies up, his arms bend, and he just crashes over. He just goes straight body over, smashes his calf into one of the bars, and just falls on the ground. And I just stand there and it's like, holy shit, are you okay? It's like, oh yeah. He just kind of like limps over and sits by the fence for the rest of the training. Like, I do a few more presses, 2 more minutes pass, another guy comes up and it's like, holy fucking shit, I want to try. Guess what he does? Swing his legs through, flies up, crashes straight over. This guy was lucky, though. He was able to flare his elbows and kind of rolled over his upper arms. But he didn't know what he was doing either. He was goddamn lucky to not just smash himself. And that's like, been here for like 10 minutes and 2 people almost died. Because if you fell on your neck from those bars, you would be like hospitalized.
I've got like, I don't know if we're doing anecdotes. If we've got room for anecdotes, we've got one more.
Yeah, fire.
Yeah, so I was in Circle Media many years ago, probably like 2002. And Circle Media is a circus school in Bristol. There was one of the guys in the year he was a juggler, and he specialised in juggling physical theatre. But he was kind of like that wiry kind of, he was okay at acrobatics, could tumble a bit, couldn't handstand. But we were out for drinks one night, in Bristol, and we were sitting on one of these high tables with a high bar stool. We all had drinks, maybe 6 or 7 of us out. And he just decides, like, he's kind of off a corner by himself. He puts his hands on the bar stool, like one of these high ones, and he just does an L-sit press, but he couldn't handstand. And he just kind of like, he went up, and like, I don't think he'd even tried it. He said afterward he'd never tried it before. It just came to his like drunken head that I can L-sit press now. And it was really good. He had flex feet and he kind of shimmied them to get through, but it was good. But he got to handstand. He can't balance a handstand. And he fell over, like just like a plank, just straight on top of like our table of drinks, and like kind of like WWE'd himself over the thing, like across all the glass and everything. And we're promptly escorted out.
Oh my god!
Yeah, it was so surreal to watch, because like he was just like going through a thing, and then he just got there.
Yeah, and
then you just kind of like, you could sense the moment the panic was like, it was, you know, when you arrive on top of a press and you haven't stopped moving, but you're straight, and then a rebalance needed to happen. It's just like
he just did nothing.
Yeah.
So moral of the story, guys: if you can't handstand, there's no real point to actually press. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like you can, or if you're that good, then go to parties and embarrass yourself. But that you can.
It's a new course coming soon.
Yeah, that you have my go ahead for. But otherwise, just learn to handstand first. But yeah, so I mean, putting these two things together as well is kind of is a tricky thing. Like being able to essentially do the entire press, and what both of us advocate and that we were very in agreement on immediately was this, that like these two elements are muscularly different. They connect, but they are very different in terms of the muscular activation. So why not be able to start practicing both of them regardless at level you're at? Some, as we said, will be better at the top one, some will be better at the lower part of it, but you can practice both parts more or less from the get-go, and there are many like levels of progression you can work on with this. You can develop a tuck planche. I mean, that is kind of like a safe bet anyway if you want to be able to do a full press, develop a tuck planche, develop a straddle L, and so on. And also work on kind of standing
it's
press.
One of these things that I find very interesting from all my own students over the last while, since I kind of adopted. I used to, years ago, would have been like training, you must be able to do a straddle press for X amount of time, X amount of reps. You must have like a pancake of this quality, and then we start working on Stalder. But then I think from discussions with you about 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, okay, maybe I'll just start working on them at the same time and using progressions. But what I was finding is like people, it's kind of a phrase that is like, your first standing press, the technique's going to be a bit shit. You're going to bend your legs, you'll bend your elbows. But your first Stalder press for most people, the form is very clean, because we've got the low press quite nice, the flexibility is caught up to whatever level, and then you can already do the transition zone and the standing press. So by the time you get there, you've got control of the legs. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you remember when we were in Iceland with the student meetup.
Yeah, when Eric did it?
Yeah, Eric did it. And I was just like, his first
Eric.
one. Hi, Eric. How's it going? Eric's does
Don't
physics.
twist those fucking hips when you go over on one arm, right? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And do quit physics to become a circus artist.
Excellent.
But like his first Stalder was like, you could post it up.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
It was textbook.
I remember.
Like toes pointed, knees locked, elbows locked. Whereas his first press was like his foot had Parkinson's for a bit.
Yeah, it's classic. But I think it's
I've seen that a lot. It's just like there's something to be said for it. It's like, okay, we can, and it happens very soon afterwards. Like it was only a couple of months for Eric that he was doing 4. I think he was doing pike presses. It's generally like by the time someone can pike press, they're normally able to Stalder press if they've raised everything about the same rate.
Yeah, exactly. If you have like a decent pike press, and you worked on kind of low pressing to a significant enough degree so that you can get your hips to standing level, and you do some, I think one of the best kind of connecting movements there is a range of motion press, where you go straddle and you pass your hands and back up, so that you get just a little bit of extra working time in that mid range.
Yeah,
and then like
the transition zone.
Yeah, and then go for banging out the Stalders. But I do think, like you said, that like it's in one sense, it's kind of easier to get good form on the bottom part of it. Like your center of mass is low during that entire part too, so like you don't have that much to worry about as in a standing press. The problem is usually like the connecting tissue between them, that like you drive through as hard as you can. As you reach the kind of mid or even the top part of the press, you gassed out. Your shoulders have moved too far front because you just couldn't deal with it to that
It's
degree
also-
yet, and then you fall. But once you do it, like they're usually not that bad. And like as Emmet said too, it's like it's a little bit the same as with all of the things that we speak about. That like form is, I mean, it's good. Like you always aim for good form, but don't let like a break of form break your ability to do it or your motivation to do it. Like it needs to like. It's the analogy of like no one cuts down a tree with sandpaper. You need to do the rough work, and the rough work is done with exercises and specific things that isolate certain areas. You work on them, and then over time you put this together. And by the time you're ready to do your first standing press, and you stand there amped up on the ground, and you lean forwards and you push harder than you've done in your entire life, and you scream and you get up, like I don't care if you bent your legs a bit, like good on you, you got up. Now okay. Now work on getting it consistent. Get them damn knees straight. Of course, like you don't want it to be stuck in this. Like, okay, now I can press, but it looks like I'm a junkie. But like, if that is what you needed to do to press, then okay, then you at least did the press. Now you start doing the sharpening. You make it look neat and clean, and however you want it to. But
yeah, it's basically what I say to people with bodyweight skills. All bodyweight skills, not just press, is tidying up the form. Is how you add weight to the bar. It's like, okay, I have certain strength to do this thing with all these compensations in the body. As I get better, then I start removing the compensations. So it's like, okay, I press and my arms bend, and I lean too far forward, and my legs go, my feet go, and I don't use all my flexibility. Well, then next week, oh wait, I can lock my arms, and that's tidied up. So if I've added 2.5 kilos to the bar, and that's how I'm.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very nice analogy.
It's always it's the same with everything. It's like look at the front levers, back levers, muscle ups, chin ups even. Like think about a beginner learning a chin up. The first kind of rep, like one shoulder comes up first, the other shoulder comes up, they don't stay retracted, they kind of arch too much, they flail the legs, they bring the knees up to the chest. As that person gets stronger, the shoulders will stay down, they'll stay retracted, they will come up even, the body will stay tight or stay in the same position they pulled from. So it's this idea like that's how you add reps, and that's like what you'll find is you might find that you are still doing say 1 rep per set, you can't increase it, but the quality has gotten better of that rep, so you are gaining strength or control or whatever we want to term it in this position, but you might not be adding reps. That will come later. So these are all these little details. There's also one thing I do look at as well with a lot of my clients when I'm assessing their progression on exercises is how early in the set do they have to start bringing in a compensation. So you'll say I give someone, say they have to do sets of 5 presses, and I start them off week 1 of the training plan, and by rep 2 they're making compensations. So I don't increase the reps over the training phase. For 6 weeks, they're still just doing 5 reps per set. But then I'm looking I was like, okay, by week 3, okay, now they're compensating in rep 4. Or the form will last between, say, they do 5 sets. So the first set will be nice, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5 will have compensations in them. And then by week 3, 4, or 5, wherever we're looking at, then by set 3, all the form is good. And then set 4 is when the compensations start coming in. So these are ways we can track like how we are actually progressing without adding reps, without adding weight. Or adding weight to the bar. So it's
a very sensible way of looking at it in that sense, and it's like you say, it's also that like when you're doing essentially what for you might be a 1 RM at that point, like you're going to. Like you're just loading as much gunpowder into your shotgun as you possibly can, and you fire. That is how it looks at that point, and that's like essentially you are then Mr. Strongman grabbing that
Atlas stone,
or the deadlift, and just powering through it. Okay, yeah, it isn't going to be pretty, and like you said, a person's first chin up won't be pretty either. But like, as a person does their first chin up, the coach will be like, yeah, shit, you got above the bar, great, good work. And that, I think, is the way to look upon it with the press too. Of course, there are details, and if you're able to keep your legs neat and tidy during it, yeah, more power to you. That's great. But just having a little bit of the same kind of look, or like looking upon it a little bit the same way, that like when a person can do one single chin, and that is like murdering them, of course, like it's not going to look great, but by the way, time they can do 5 chins, first one's probably going to look pretty good. And it's going to be a little bit the same with the press, like at the point where like one press is everything you can do, and you know that you might be able to hit one in your training, it is likely that it's not going to be great. By the time you can do 5 like single reps in one training, like you said, several, like maybe a couple of them will look good. By the time you can do 3 presses in a row, your first one will likely be light. When you can do 5 in a row, like 4 of them will actually be pretty decent, quite likely. So that like this is a way to think about it that I think is kind of practical as well, that like it is tough to make that thing that you can do only once with maximal focus that actually looks as good as you would wish it to.
Yeah, it's always this idea of it's an idea I picked up from Louis Simmons of powerlifting fame, of the amount of cues you can give a lifter relative to the 1RM they're lifting. So I think he had a rule of thumb. It was like, if they're lifting 50% of their 1RM, you can give them 3 to 4 cues to pay attention to, and every 10% you go up, you reduce the cues till eventually you've hopefully whittled down to the more important one. So think
it's actually quite smart.
So it's just like, if they're lifting 80-90%, then you can only tell them one thing, like head up or expand your ab, whatever they're doing. But it's the same with like when you're learning to press, like when you go for those first few reps, when you're pushing forward, you can only really focus on one thing, which could be shoulders, it could be compress, it could be abs, it could be take a dump. Whatever.
Take a dump cue, very important.
Very important. Mikael's
I'll speak about that in a second.
But as you get better and as you get a bit more control, you can pay attention. You can have 2 points of focus, 3 points of focus, or a little checklist where you go like toes, compress, shoulders. Whereas before you might be only able to keep an eye on one. So it's another way to think about it, is like as you get more capacity in these movements, you can pay attention to more and more details. Should we finish with the take a dump cue? Yeah,
it's probably a good place to end it. So like, instead of thinking that you need to do belly button magic when you press, think that you need to take a shit. So it might sound really dumb, and it is kind of dumb. Magic. Yeah, but it's true. So there is a thing, like it's mainly relevant, or it's relevant in the mid part of the press. If you do a full one, like let's say you go from an L sit and all the way up, as you come to the point where you need to pass your hands, it's relevant. And also if you do a standing press from handstand. So what do I mean? Well, when you because here is also, it kind of relates to compression. So compression is pulling your legs to your chest, right? And resisting it with the shoulders. So but when you're pressing up, you're actually just doing that for a moment, and then you actually bring the legs away from the body. So you're not, like from a standing press, you don't compress for a long time because you want to articulate the legs away from the body. And that articulation away from the body can be helped by your breath, simply by literally cueing yourself. I like to just say that it's similar to taking a shit, because this is this kind of a kind of thing that creates this kind of this.
You all know how Mikael shits now.
Yeah, that's how I shit before. Like you just use that power. Like it's you can also say that it's a similar kind of tension in your midsection as if you want to take a punch to the stomach, you say, okay, punch me in the stomach, and you kind of tense up for that. It's kind of the same type of pressure that you want to create. Kind of, it feels as if it's kind of like a super pressure underneath your abs, and this kind of pressure
we would technically term that the Valsalva maneuver, but
okay, cool.
It's okay.
Yeah, it sounds fancy. Come on, take a shit. It's much better. Shit, so you really want to, like, it's similar to when you do squats and stuff as well. Like, it's that kind of pressure in your midsection is something that you can literally use as Like you don't need to make a sound. Okay, you don't need to do that, especially
I
when
have
you're
to
at the gym.
verify
People
Mikael
are
does
gonna-
make sounds when he does lots of presses.
Yeah, when I do a lot of presses, especially on the last ones, I'll like I will literally, especially if you do range of motion press and you go down and then you're like
Range of emotion press.
range of emotion press. That's a good one. We're gonna use that at some point. That is definitely a keeper. But yeah, so you lower down, you pass your hands or with your feet, and as you do that kind of reversing thing, that's when you will activate this. And for me, it always happened very, very intuitively. But I
A lot
started,
of fiber in his diet.
yeah, started thinking about it as kind of something that you can use as a cue, especially when you want to do that takeoff from the press, from standing, or if you're doing range of motion work and you go low beyond your hands and then back up. So yeah, think of toilet times when you press.
I think we're just going to wrap up there.
Yeah,
If you're
it's
still lifting.
pretty good point of wrapping up. So
it's one of those things it's what I kind of like about these cues that sound stupid but work is when it works for you, you will never forget it.
yeah, exactly.
Put it that way.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly that.
Okay.
Let's just keep it at that.
Yeah.
And I guess thank you guys for listening to our rambles this time.
Yeah, I hope it was informative. I hope you liked it. Normal sort of housekeeping outro. These podcast is brought to you by Handstand Factory, which is the course we've made. So it's even that. So thank you to everyone on Kickstarter as usual. This wouldn't be possible without you. If you're looking to figure out how to do this stuff in practice and how to, maybe you want to press, maybe you want a handstand, maybe you want to press to a handstand. We've got some courses that can help you with that. So check them out. Other than that, you know where to find us. We're on social media. We also, so we've got to remind you, there is loads of free content on our Instagrams of at Handstand Factory, at Emmet Lewis, and at Mikael Christiansen. I've also got my YouTube, and we have a Handstand Factory YouTube as well, where you might have found this podcast, but if not, check it out. Loads of free stuff. We've got loads of tutorials as well. And the other thing is, if you have any questions for the podcast, send them in on the contact form on the website, handstandfactory.com. Put them in podcast questions in the title, and if they're good, we'll read them out. If they're bad, we'll read them out with your name attached to it.
Suffer.
Other than that, goodbye.
Yeah, cheers.